And I'll get my presentation. There we go. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. So today we are talking about fueling for the race specifically. Everything we are doing now is obviously in preparation for race day, whether you're doing RPI and whatever event you're doing at RPI, but we do all this training and then we get to the race, and it's important that we are able to put all that good training to use so that we can perform. Just training is not the same as performing. You're kind of learning this as you're going through workouts. It's not just about what your FTP is. It's not about what your heart rate is. It's not about, how many days of rest did you get? It's about putting everything together on race day. And that includes the training and the fitness. It includes your pacing and how you're executing a pacing strategy, whether it's in an interval workout or whether it's in a race. It's about your mental well-being and, how mentally on are you? How motivated are you, and how much rest have you gotten? How has stress been in your life? How has sleep been, and all those sorts of things. And finally, how has your nutrition and your fueling been? And it's not just about what you're taking in during the specific workout or the race. It's about everything. It's about how have you been fueling throughout your training? How have you been recovering with good, proper nutrition, hydration, electrolytes, and all of that day to day. Everything adds up. It's not to say that you can't have a bad day or you miss, fueling a workout well or anything like that. Like, that's totally going to happen. But it's, again, about the big picture. When we go back to thinking about training and making all the workouts green, same idea with fueling. You want to, most days, get everything's pretty close to ideal. That leaves room for also having a life and having fun. You definitely, fueling is only one part about eating. It's diet, and eating various foods is so much more than just fueling for performance. It's about quality of life. It's about social aspects of, just enjoying food and community and overall health too. So if we're not healthy, we're obviously not going to be able to perform well. So that being said, today we are talking about race day fueling and building your fueling plan. If you haven't thought about it yet, no big deal. If it's your first race or your first RPI, it's okay. We'll talk about some specifics. If you've done it before, you might find some areas for improvement based on your previous strategies. So let's start. You all know me, so I don't need to do the introduction really, but I am the base camp cycling and nutrition coach. I have my doctorate in applied exercise physiology and my master's in sports nutrition. I'm also a registered dietitian. I used to race competitively. I race a little bit for fun now, but my background is in off-road racing primarily. I do some work on the editorial board in the area of hydration. I also advise at Bicycling Magazine and Runner's World, and I teach sports nutrition part-time as well at the university level. So let's talk about race day fueling. And I mentioned this in Brianna's post today in the Facebook group when she was talking about how to get it right for race day. And one thing Tim said in the very beginning was that poor nutrition, not fitness and not your training, is the leading cause of missing the target on race day. And it's so true. I mean, even if you only do half of the workouts or half of the training plan, you can still pull together a performance on race day. Is it ideal or what you are capable of? Probably not, but you could still do well. However, if you nail your training plan 100% and you totally screw up your nutrition plan for race day, you're not going to do as well, especially in a longer race. You can get away with making some mistakes in a short race, of course, but in a long race, and particularly at RPI, with the added challenge of the terrain and the elevation, and then, of course, if you're doing Queen Stage Race, your race day fueling, it could make or break your event. So let's see, I need to There we go. What do we do to have a plan? Let's start thinking about it 2 to 3 days in advance. Now, all of this you can start practicing now. So 2 to 3 days before the weekend, before your longer rides and your harder rides over the weekend, start planning what you might do the leading up to the race. And what you want to think about in terms of your regular daily diet 2 to 3 days out is kind of this idea of carbohydrate loading. It doesn't mean that you are eating giant loaves of bread and plates of pasta or anything like that. All it means is you're searching out and choosing carbohydrate-based meals and snacks that still have moderate protein, but are a little bit lower in fat leading into the race. The reason for that is when you are emphasizing carbohydrate in your diet, if you're not decreasing calories or energy intake somewhere else, then you're just going to be overeating or eating in positive energy balance. So taking in more calories than you're expending, because your training load will kind of taper off leading into the race. So for that reason, when you increase carbs, and the reason for that is you want to start to store muscle glycogen and keep your liver glycogen topped off and ready to go for race day. You're really looking at about 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of your body weight of carbohydrate per day. It might seem like a lot, again, if you break it up and you've paid attention to your macronutrient intake and your calorie intake from our first 2 fueling webinars. If 8 to 10 seems like a lot, start trying to work towards that now, especially on your bigger ride days on the weekend, and then maybe the day before that leading into the weekend. Start on the lower end at 8 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate per day. And then if that seems doable, see if you can get closer to 10. How do you do that? Again, you don't save it for just one meal. I would divide it over your 3 meals and 3 snacks, let's say, each day, and each one of them should be more carbohydrate focused. Also take in 60 grams of carbs per hour during your rides leading into the event. Now, again, those rides, because you'll be kind of tapering off in the workload, might be really short and really easy, or they might be short with some intensity. And maybe you typically wouldn't fuel a ride that's 45 minutes to an hour with 60 grams of carbohydrate. But as part of your carbohydrate loading to get the glucose into your muscle so it can be stored as glycogen really efficiently, taking that in during your rides can really help that process. It also makes it so you have to eat less off the bike to accomplish that carbohydrate loading. So what are some examples of foods? When I said you don't need to be eating loaves of bread and giant plates of pasta, normal carbohydrate-based foods, they can be complex carbs, nutrient-dense foods like fruits, vegetables, and then I have oats, cereals, breads, pancakes, potatoes, rice, crackers, energy bars, starchy vegetables, even dairy has carbohydrate, beans, lentils, and then of course, sports nutrition supplements for during your rides or right before and right afterwards as needed. So again, that's starting to think about your race day fueling 2 to 3 days ahead of time. Now let's think about race morning. So 2 to 3 hours before your event. And again, I highly recommend starting to practice this weekend before your Saturday ride, for example. Have a full meal 2 to 3 hours ahead of time if you can. I know during training, sometimes you're getting up really early to kind of beat the heat. So it might not be possible to have that much, but start thinking about it and see, try to find a day where you can manage your pre-race breakfast and see how you tolerate it. You might find that you might want to get up 30 minutes earlier, or you can tolerate it better than expected if you eat a lower fiber breakfast, or you break it up into 2 smaller breakfasts. Any of those are possible options. During that pre-race breakfast, your pre-race meal, you're targeting 2 to 3 grams per kilogram of your body weight of carbohydrate. Again, the focus is on carbs. And to be able to get that in and not have GI issues or not have to keep running to the bathroom or not be too full to eat enough, you want it to be fairly low in fiber and fairly low in fat and low to moderate in protein. So some examples of common pre-race breakfasts that are easily digested, and of course, this is again very individual, but a lot of people like pancakes or waffles or even a bagel with some fruit. That could be banana, berries. You could add some additional maple syrup or honey to get some more carbohydrates there without a lot of volume. Sprinkle some salt on there, and then you could also have a bottle of a sports drink. That'll contribute carbohydrates, electrolytes, and fluid, because you definitely want to make sure that you're hydrating the morning up too, so you're not getting to the race start line dehydrated in any way. Another common breakfast is oatmeal with dried fruit, honey, banana, a side of toast maybe, and then a side of a sports drink. So the thing with dried fruit, honey, maple syrup, granola, all of those things are really energy dense, so calorie dense, carbohydrate dense foods that you can get a lot of. You can get the grams up without a huge volume of food. So if you get really full very easily, start thinking about those foods that you can get a lot of calories and carbs in small quantities, and then maybe supplementing the rest with your sports drink. So that's 2 to 3 hours before, and that would be your full meal, your full breakfast. Then you also want to have a little snack as you get closer to the event. So if you want to think about more complex, harder to digest foods, even though you still want them to be easily digestible, but getting to the closer you get to the race start time, the more simple you want the carbohydrates to be, or the more easily digestible. So less fiber, even less fat, less complex carbs, more simple carbs. So more sugary based foods, white bagels, white rice, crackers, that sort of thing, toast. So here you're looking at about 1 to 1.5 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of your body weight, about 1 to 1.5 hours before the race start time. I wouldn't target really much closer than that for a meal this size or a snack this size, because you don't want your glucose and insulin response to overlap with the race start. So you want plenty of time till your blood glucose will go up, your insulin will go up, you'll store the glucose in your liver, in some of your muscle, and just kind of, again, stay topped off in your energy reserves. Some examples of this could just be a bagel. It could be granola with oat milk or almond milk. It could be an energy bar with a sports drink. It could be a banana with a sports drink. Again, all of those will give you about 1 to 1.5 grams of carbs per kilogram. And then your final top off on the start line, if you see people around you opening a gel, finishing their start line bottle, what they're doing is they're topping off right before they get started to race. You have pre-race nerves, you've got adrenaline, your body's dumping glycogen. So your liver is, going to be releasing glycogen very quickly to get glucose into the bloodstream when the race starts. So getting ahead of that and allowing some carbohydrate intake on the start line, that actually will contribute to your first hour of fueling. So I would say right on the start line, 5 minutes before the start, or within that 5-minute window, have a gel with some sips of water, or a serving of chews with some water, or half a bottle of your sports drink. Sometimes just having, during your warm up, having a start line bottle with carbohydrate and electrolytes in your sports drink, you can just kind of finish that off on the start line, toss the bottle, and get started with a full bottle for the race. And then during the event, of course, it's important to target and make sure that you are carrying enough fuel and that you're taking it in also. So plan this all out in advance now. 60 grams of carbs an hour if you've practiced that. If you have trained with more than that, so a lot of you I know have experimented with taking in 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. If you're comfortable with that at intensity and for longer durations, it's fine for you to use that during the race as well, as long as you're, again, confident with it. If you've tried 90 grams of carbs an hour for some training rides, but it's kind of iffy and sometimes you have GI problems, but you're definitely comfortable with 60, just shoot for 60 grams of carbs an hour on race day with plenty of hydration. That might be 700 milliliters an hour or 24-ounce bottle an hour. It might be 20 ounces an hour. It kind of depends on you, your sweat rate, the environment, how hot and humid it is, and how hard you're racing too. So if you're not comfortable with 90 grams of carbs an hour, don't plan to race with that. Maybe plan to race with 60 to 75 grams of carbs an hour. 90 if you're 100% confident in that strategy. So what does this look like for someone who's 130, 35 pounds, 60 kilograms? You're looking at about 180 grams of carbohydrate for your full meal at breakfast. Again, that's probably shocking to some of you, but it can be done. It just takes a little practice, and it takes finding the right foods that you are able to actually get in and not feel so full and sick from it. 90 grams of carbs 1 to 1.5 hours before the event, another 30 grams of carbs on the start line, and then 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour with 24 ounces of fluid per hour during the event. So do some math after this tonight and throughout the week. Get ready for the weekend and try that. Take notes in your training peaks, and if you found that it was just way too much, maybe address, the type of food that you're taking in, maybe address the timing, and maybe just dial it back a little bit and try to work back up towards what your ideal target is for race day, because you still have a few weeks or a couple of weeks. So altitude is another thing that we need to consider when it comes to race day fueling for RPI. Just like training and just like the racing itself, altitude is another stress on your body. We always talk about stressors and then how we deal with that in terms of internal strain. Well, altitude is another stress. Again, what it's going to do is increase your hydration needs at rest and particularly during exercise. So when you are traveling there, if you're flying especially, flying can also dehydrate you. But when you're traveling there, as soon as you arrive at elevation, start drinking more. At altitude, there is lower partial pressure of oxygen, so less oxygen available. Your respiratory rate will increase, so you're going to lose more fluid through just your breathing and your talking, which obviously the rate of that will increase as you start riding. The stress of being at altitude also increases your body's reliance on burning carbohydrate for fuel. So what that means is at sea level, without the stress of altitude or elevation, at maybe 85% of your FTP, you're burning mostly fat, let's say. But now at the same relative intensity at altitude, you're going to be burning a higher percentage of glycogen or stored carbohydrate compared to fat. And that's, again, because your body is more reliant and will more quickly grab stored carbohydrate to burn for fuel for the same relative intensity. So what does that mean? It means that you're going to, if you're not fueling with carbohydrates, you're going to bonk earlier and at a lower workload. You're going to fatigue earlier. Hopefully you notice that way before you end up bonking, but I'm trying to stress the importance of, yes, you might be able to get away with under fueling some of your rides, or missing, a few carbohydrate feedings during a ride or a training week or something like that. But when you get to elevation, there's no room there. You're going to quickly feel it if you're not hitting your target for your hourly carb intake. And if you're not coming in as well fueled and hydrated as you could be, you're going to feel that from the start of the race. Carry that over for, the long course on Sunday, or carry it over from stage to stage. If you're doing Queen Stage Race, you can see how quickly and how catastrophically being under fueled or under hydrated can affect your performance at a race at higher elevation. So how much more do you need to drink? I would say at rest, at least 25% more fluids than you normally do, probably more than that. So probably 50% more fluids at rest. And then if you're fueling or drinking 16 to 20 ounces per hour during your rides, think about scaling that up to 24 ounces an hour. If you haven't considered carrying a hydration pack for additional fluids, I would highly recommend that. You have time to pick one up and train with it. They are pretty tolerable to wear. They're not like big and bulky like they used to be. So that's another way. If you can't carry any more bottles, you don't have bigger bottles that you can carry on your bike. Being able to sip from your hydration pack is a huge advantage in a long race. Add some electrolytes, particularly sodium, to your drinks and or salt to your food. So I'm talking about your daily intake when you arrive in Steamboat, or sorry, in Idaho. I have Steamboat Gravel on the brain. So you don't just want to be drinking more and more plain water. When you add the additional fluids, either start salting your food more or drop in an electrolyte supplement into your water. And that will help you retain the additional fluids that you're drinking. Keep your race fueling simple, hit the carb targets I mentioned, and use easy to digest carbs. I know a lot of you like to do your longer rides and your adventure rides and your trainer rides eating real food, and that can be, sandwiches, it can be rice cakes individually packaged, it could be potatoes and whatever. That's fine. There is nothing wrong with just using traditional sports nutrition supplements like gels and chews and bars and sports drinks. They are formulated to get you what you need in terms of carbohydrates every 30 minutes or every 20 minutes or every 60 minutes, however you want to take that in. They're formulated with the right or within range of an optimal amount of sodium per milliliter of fluid that you're drinking. So if you're mixing your sports drinks according to the directions on the label, then you should be, and you've practiced it in training, you should be pretty spot on there. But yeah, just keep it simple. Have a spreadsheet, which doesn't sound simple, but it actually does simplify things, of the products that you have. What are the grams of carbs? What are the milligrams of sodium? How much fluid can you carry? And how much do you plan on taking it in? Then actually take it in. And that's something you've just got to practice during your training rides. And again, from our conversation on Facebook today, especially with the heat and humidity the way it is right now, that can decrease your appetite. With harder intervals too, it decreases your appetite and your desire to eat even more. But part of training is training the fueling too. And we do it not because necessarily we want to, but we need to. There's no way around it. If you want to get the most out of your body in terms of sustained power and fatigue resistance and being able to just perform over the long haul, you've got to train your body to fuel. It's also not reasonable to wait until race day or race week to try, because your gut is probably not going to tolerate it. You're probably going to have bloating or GI issues if you go from 0 to 60 all of a sudden. But the good news is your gut is highly trainable. And in little as 2 weeks, you can actually train your gut to be able to handle up to 90 grams of carbs an hour. A lot of people can. Of course, it depends. Like if you've been on like a keto diet or an ultra low carb diet for a very long time, you might not have all the transporters and machinery that you need to absorb and utilize 90 grams of carbs an hour, but you could probably still train your gut to handle 60 grams of carbs an hour at a fairly high intensity, even in the heat, provided you are, practicing that regularly and training right now, practicing it in the heat and maintaining your hydration strategy. Hydration is a key part of actually being able to empty your stomach contents into your gut and then absorb everything. So hydration and electrolyte balance are really important for that. If you're dehydrated or you're underdoing the electrolytes or overdoing the electrolytes, you're going to mess up the fluid balance there in your gut, which is also going to mess up the absorption. And that's when you can start to have gut issues and cramping and like aversion to sweet things, nausea, vomiting, all of that can happen if you've even just messed up your hydration and your electrolytes. So it's not just about, you know, taking in the carbs and ignoring everything else. You kind of have to do all three of those pieces, right? And how do you know you're doing it right? Well, you can get through a Saturday training that's pretty long and pretty hard with no issues. And then also feel good for the Sunday ride. That's the best way to know that it's a tried and true race fueling plan, is that you can use it back to back on the weekends and you feel good both days for the long ride, for the harder rides. And definitely, you know, if you haven't practiced this at all, start practicing it on your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday rides as well during the week, because one, I think you'll feel better. I think you'll see better numbers. You'll recover better, and you're just training your gut that much more. And then when you get to the weekend and you can implement it for the longer rides, you also gain a lot more confidence in your strategy, in your fueling strategy and your racing strategy. So the final tip from this slide is, at altitude, you want to drink more than you normally do per hour, so on the bike, and don't get behind on fluids, even during the cold morning starts. So the one thing about racing at elevation and in Idaho, even during the summer, is it can be very cold in the morning, and that makes you not want to drink. It makes you kind of shivering, especially if you're used to training and riding in the warmth of the day. When you're shivering and that cold, it also makes you need to pee. So now you've got, you know, the low desire to drink because you're cold and shivering. You have cold-induced diuresis, so you're getting dehydrated from peeing. It's a bad combination. So how do you counteract that? I would preload your hydration with higher sodium the night before and the morning of. So just making sure that you're drinking not just plain water again, you know, water with something salty in it, electrolyte tab, goo hydration tab, or something like that. Element is another one. Scratch has a sodium preload that you can add to your bottles. You can just salt your food again with your hydration. And then make sure that your first bottle that morning, or your start line bottle, also has plenty of sodium in it to help you retain that water, so you're not peeing out everything if it's cold. If you really find it difficult to hydrate in cold weather, then think about also having a warm bottle at the start. So whether that's your start line bottle or something you're sipping on before, it could be like a hot apple drink. I know Scratch makes that. Goo might make something as well that's a hot sports drink type of mixture that you mix with hot water. You could even just have like hot chocolate or something like that. But something that will encourage drinking, ideally something with sodium in it, and then something, you know, with carbohydrates like hot chocolate. You could add some sea salt to the top. I see people drinking tea and stuff like that. Totally fine. I would add honey and something like salt, sprinkle salt in it, so you are getting the carbohydrates and the electrolytes with that too. Gut issues will always get worse when you're dehydrated. Again, I think I already said that, but just want to also make the point that hydration or dehydration is actually a bigger risk at elevation. And so if that's happening to you, make sure that you're trying to correct your hydration strategy or your hydration status with drinking electrolyte fluids to restore hydration status, instead of just trying to like slam more carbohydrates down. So the more carbs you're eating and the more calories and the more gels and chews and all of that stuff that you're taking in while you're dehydrating, the worse off your GI stress will be. And then the longer it'll take to get back your energy, because you'll just not want to eat anything, or worse, you'll get sick. So practice, and then practice some more. And so you're confident with, you know, how to recognize the signs of, maybe your upset GI tract, or maybe dehydration, or, whether you need more fluids or more sodium or more carbs. They all kind of feel a little bit differently. When you're in the moment, it can be confusing. So that's why I suggest taking notes during the training process to kind of sort it all out. All right. So when you are sitting down to create your strategy, it's easier. I said use a spreadsheet. It's also easy to lay it all out just so you can visualize how much it is. So I think this is Tim's photo. I can't remember whose it is, but they laid all their food out. Now, this is something that might be good for a long, slower training ride, like a Sunday maybe, because notice the high amount of complex carbs, and you see carrots and broccoli and like fruit in there and sandwiches. That's fine. Trail mix. It's not what I would recommend for race day, but look at the idea. The idea is that you're taking all your fuel and you're laying it out in front of you, dividing it out by hours, planning on what you're going to eat when, and put the food in 1 hour blocks. That helps you visualize it. Again, it's a little bit easier and a lot more compact if you're using things like GU products, or whatever brand it is that you are familiar with. So here's an example of what it looks like with GU. So if you're mixing Roctane full strength in a bottle, that can give you 60 grams of carbs. Combine that with one of their gels, that's 20 to 25 grams of carbs. And there you have 80 to 85 grams of carbs per hour. Again, I would only do that if you've trained that way and you're comfortable with the intake. If not, you could also have a bottle of water or electrolyte fluid with GU hydration in it, and then kind of alternate drinking from the 2 bottles, but still get the gel every hour. And that might get you closer to 60 grams of carbs an hour. A banana is 30 grams of carbs. Banana is like one of the most just quick and easy pieces of real food fuel that you can kind of count on being around 30 grams of carbs, which is, easy to do the math with 30. A Coke, if sometimes it just hits the spot at an aid station or at the end of the race. A Coke is about 40 grams of carbs, 35 to 40, depending on the size of the can. So there you go. Sometimes that has a little bit of caffeine in it as well. A potato, people always want to eat potatoes. They can really hit the spot when they're salted. RPI is famous for some of their potatoes, obviously. So that's another option if you have those at aid stations. You have to eat a lot of potatoes to get the 30 to 40 grams. So, one potato might not be as many carbs as you think, but it sure might hit the spot and be a nice alternative to all the sweet stuff that you're taking in. All right, I want to go to questions now. And I've got some notes from Rebecca on the actual race course as well on the aid stations, if anyone has questions about that. So, okay, the only question I see so far is from this morning: what to do when you bonk. Recognizing the signs early will be the first step. So you're like, wow, my RPE is higher than I would expect. Or you look down at your power meter, you look down at your heart rate, and it's a lot lower than you would expect to see at the given effort at that time point. So what do? You look back and you say, okay, I know I took 60 grams, I packed 60 grams of carbs an hour. Let's see how much have I had. And you're like, oh, well, I actually haven't had anything in 45 minutes or 90 minutes, or you dropped a bottle and you didn't realize it. And so now you don't have your bottle of GU, Roctane. So you're late on your carbs. I would start taking in carbohydrates slowly, like 20 to 30 grams at a time. So what does that look like? It could be a half an energy bar. It could be a serving of chews. It could be a gel. And then you sip your hydration and you wait 15 to 20 minutes and you do it again, you take in another 20 to 30 grams of carbs with some more hydration and electrolytes. And hopefully within the next 20 to 60 minutes, you're back on track and you can just start fueling as normal again. What I would not do is stop at an aid station and eat 1,000 calories. Or sometimes at the aid stations, they'll have things that are not ideal. Like, yeah, sure. Sometimes, you want a pizza if you're doing like an ultra or something like that, but nothing like really high in fat or fried or just like a massive quantity of anything is a good idea. Be conservative, just back off your pace a little bit, recognize what's happening and recognize how to fix it in a deliberate manner. 20 to 30 grams of carbs at a time every 15 to 20 minutes or so should get you back on track. Here's another question about fueling. So does weight play a factor in how many carbs during the ride? I see it set up for pre-race meals, etc. That's a really good question, Sue. When we are giving advice for daily intake and how to kind of time the carbohydrate availability, we do it based on grams per kilogram of your body weight. That's correct. The studies have shown when they measure carbohydrate oxidation or the actual utilization of carbohydrate making ATP, and then we measure that amount by collecting the expired air that you're breathing. There's no difference that's based on body weight. So it's not different between men and women. It's not different between body size. In fact, there is some research that shows that women and smaller sized women, smaller sized people will benefit more from a higher rate of carbohydrate intake. So it actually might be the opposite of what you're thinking. Now, I think that would really only be true if you were also racing a pretty short and hard race. So you were spending a significant amount of time above your threshold, above your FTP. But no, otherwise, the recommendations are not based on body weight for during exercise fuel oxidation or utilization. It's just, they found that kind of up to 60 grams of carbs an hour for most people when they're using a single source like glucose is good. And then the more highly trained you become and the harder and longer that you're going, if you take in a combination of glucose and fructose, which is what most sports nutrition drinks and supplements are nowadays, you can actually use and take up and use to make energy, 90 to 100 to 120 grams of carbs an hour, whether you're male or female, or it doesn't matter your body size. Training status is the biggest influencer there. Like if you're pretty detrained or untrained or, unfit, you don't need 90 plus grams of carbs an hour. But if you've kind of really built the machinery, I always use that term, to process all those carbs and actually use them in the muscle through training and through years of carbohydrate intake and training, then yeah, you could really benefit from a high carb intake. Okay, thoughts on carrying and bringing your own versus relying on aid stations? Yeah, that's a really good question. So I always say carry enough to get you through. Even if that means carrying a hydration pack, carrying your fuel for sure. That means you don't rely on aid stations are sometimes questionable. RPI is a fantastic event, so I would not be as worried about it at RPI, but blanket answer at some races, the aid stations will run out of water. They will run out of ice. They will run out of the best flavor of chews or goo or whatever. And you might be completely out of luck if you were relying on that. We probably all make that mistake once. But that's why I recommend, having the stuff that you are used to training with, that your gut can handle at the heat in the heat at elevation for, 4 to 9 hours or whatever it is. Carry that with you. And then if they have stuff at the aid station, they have cold water and ice, great, use it to mix your bottles. I don't always at races rely on them mixing the sports drink to the instructions. I've seen volunteers completely messing it up, either doing math wrong or they're trying to save the powder and make it go a long way so it's dilute. All of those things can really mess you up if you think about it. So when you've trained so hard and practiced something so specific, to get messed up by something like that is really a shame. That being said, RPI does a really nice job. So you probably don't have to worry about it. I still like to be prepared if possible. Thursday, or stage 1 and 2, there are no aid stations on the course, so just be aware of that. On Thursday, there will be water. There'll be goo, chews, drink, gels at the start and the finish, but no aid stations on the course. For Friday and the time trial, there'll be a little bit of water at the start and the finish, but again, it's a 22-mile neutral ride to the time trial start, and then you have to ride back. So you do have to take some stuff with you. What I would say is carry your hydration pack, take all your pre-race intake, your food, your drink, your snacks, your goos, your gels, whatever. So you can take in your pre-ride intake, time it for your race start time, and then you can leave your pack there and then grab it when you're done with your time trial. And then you can have your recovery, nutrition, and hydration in there as well to ride back down the hill. So it's a long day, even though the timed part is short. So definitely, be prepared with your stuff there. For Sunday, there is water and goo products at the start and the finish. At the finish, I'll also have goo recovery plus some other stuff. Every course will have marked aid stations where they'll have water, goo, gels, chews, Roctane drink mix. There'll also be fruit, chips, M&Ms, and standard aid station food like that. The tater tot rest stop is halfway. The French fry, there's 2 rest spots that you'll pass twice, so 4 chances to top off. The baked potato will have 3 rest stops that you pass twice, so 6 chances. The biggest distance will be between the rest stop, is after the rest stop 22 miles until you come back around Copper Basin Loop Road and hit the aid station again. So that's the longest segment without the aid. It's also one of the hardest and most remote parts. So definitely, if you're planning, depending on what race you're doing, plan to have more than you think. And, for the aid stations, if you're carrying stuff and you end up eating through it, the aid stations are there to help support you. So definitely take advantage of it, but don't rely on them exclusively. Oops. Okay. Any more questions? Last chance. All right. If anything comes up after you watch the recording, go ahead and drop them in Facebook. I'm always happy to answer them there. Also, as you start practicing your fueling plan, if you haven't started yet, go ahead and ask your questions. If you feel something unexpected, like you thought everything was going to work well, and it's just not when you're putting it all together, or you're having a hard time coming up with ideas for what to eat the night before or the morning of, we have plenty of people in the group who can also give advice and, ideas for things that have worked for them. And I'm always happy to help as well. All right, thanks to everyone, and have a great rest of the week, and we will see you guys soon.